The night sky over Earth changed forever when the stars began to vanish one by one. At first, people thought it was an eclipse, or maybe a trick of the light. But then came the deep sound, like thunder rolling from space itself. Every television, every phone, every satellite stopped working at once. Above the clouds, something huge was moving, so large it blocked out the moon completely. People ran into the streets, staring upward. Soldiers were called. Scientists shouted orders. The world held its breath as the object descended. It was not a meteor, not a ship as humans knew ships. It was a city-sized shadow, covered in dark metal and pulsing with blue energy. It came to a stop over the Pacific Ocean, its shape reflecting like a mountain of steel over the waves. The air turned cold. The lights of entire cities flickered and went dark. Then, every screen on Earth turned on by itself. A face appeared, a tall figure with silver skin, glowing red eyes, and a voice that echoed in every human mind. "People of Earth," the voice said, "I am Vorik the Infinite, Overlord of the Galactic Dominion. Your species has reached the end of its cycle." The world went silent. Vorik continued, "For centuries, I have watched your wars, your greed, your destruction. You were given a planet full of life, and you poisoned it. You have no right to rule this world anymore." The camera zoomed out, showing a monstrous device behind him, a weapon shaped like a planet-sized cannon, glowing with a red light so bright it made even the clouds tremble. Vorik spread his arms and declared, "Behold, my creation, the planet killer. With one command, it can erase this world in a single breath." Panic spread like fire. People screamed. World leaders tried to send messages, but nothing worked. The alien ship had jammed every signal. Even the most powerful nations were powerless. Fighter jets took off from bases, but when they came close to the Overlord ship, they simply disintegrated in midair, dust before they could fire a single shot. Vorik's voice returned, calm but terrifying. "You have 1 hour to surrender your planet. After that, I will reduce your world to ashes." In underground bases and secret bunkers, humanity's brightest minds gathered. Scientists tried to analyze the alien technology, but nothing matched anything in their databases. It was beyond understanding. Some gave up. Others prayed. But among them stood one man who didn't seem afraid at all. Dr. Mason Reed, a human engineer with a reputation for building machines that shouldn't exist, stared at the screen and laughed quietly. "A planet killer," he muttered. "Looks like someone overcompensating for something." Everyone around him froze. "You're joking at a time like this," a general barked. Mason shrugged. "If this thing really works, we're all dead anyway. So I might as well laugh." His calmness made others nervous. He was known for solving impossible problems, but this was beyond anything human. Still, something in his eyes showed he saw more than the rest. Mason walked toward a communication console, a direct link to the alien signal. The generals shouted, "You can't just talk to it." But Mason ignored them. He adjusted the signal frequency, bypassed security locks, and sent a message directly to Vorik. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the alien's giant face appeared again on every screen. "Who dares speak?" Vorik demanded. Mason leaned forward casually. "Name's Mason. Nice fireworks you got there. Tell me, did you keep the receipt for that thing?" For a second, nobody breathed. The whole control room went silent. The alien's red eyes narrowed. "Receipt," Vorik repeated, confused. Mason smiled. "You know, for when it doesn't work like you planned. You'd want your money back, right?" The general covered his face, thinking the engineer had just doomed them all. But Vorik didn't kill him. Instead, the alien tilted his head, curious. "You mock me," Vorik thundered. Mason replied, "No, not at all. Just wondering why someone so powerful needs to brag before pushing a button." Vorik leaned closer, his image filling the screen. "You have courage. Or stupidity." Mason shrugged again. "Maybe both. But I've built machines too. Big ones. And usually, the louder someone shouts about their weapon, the more likely it is to explode in their own face. The room went dead silent again. Vorek's generals behind him hissed in anger, demanding the human be vaporized. But Vorek raised a hand. "Interesting creature," he said softly. "Very well, human Mason. Since you enjoy jokes, let me show you something not so funny." The image changed. Now Mason and the others could see another planet, somewhere in deep space. Vorek pointed at it. This world refused to kneel. "Watch." A light erupted from the planet killer. The planet on screen glowed, cracked, and then shattered like glass. The explosion was so bright that even the people on Earth covered their eyes. Vorek turned back toward the camera. "That is what awaits your world." Mason didn't blink. He simply said, "Impressive. But you blew up a rock, not a mind." Vorek stared at him for a long moment. Then he smiled for the first time, a cold, alien smile. "You will amuse me, human. Perhaps I will let you live a few minutes longer." Mason leaned back in his chair. "Take your time. I've got plenty of jokes left." The connection ended. The room erupted with shouts. "You've doomed us," someone screamed. "He's going to destroy everything." But Mason just looked at the blank screen, thoughtful. "No," he said quietly. "He showed us his weapon because he wants fear, not war. That means there's a weakness." He turned to the generals. "I need access to the satellite archives and all alien data you've got." They hesitated, but obeyed. Outside, the sky still glowed red from the alien ship's lights. People across the planet were crying, praying, hiding. But in that moment, one man, the man who laughed, was already planning the Overlord's downfall. And far above the Earth, Vorek watched the human's image replaying in his chamber. His expression was unreadable. "A fragile creature that dares to laugh at death," he said quietly. "Perhaps humans are not as simple as they seem." The planet killer's core pulsed behind him, casting shadows across his throne. The invasion had begun, but neither side realized yet that one man's laughter would soon decide the fate of two worlds. Vorek the Infinite sat upon his throne of black steel, deep inside his colossal ship, staring into the image of the small blue planet below. Earth shimmered like a jewel against the darkness of space. The Overlord had destroyed countless worlds before, yet none had dared to insult him. None had dared to laugh. But this human, this strange, fearless engineer, had done just that. His name echoed in Vorek's mind. Mason Reed. The Overlord's red eyes glowed brighter as he replayed the human's words. "Did you keep the receipt?" It was nonsense, yet somehow it struck something inside him. Not anger alone, but curiosity. No one had ever spoken to him with such calm and boldness. Vorek leaned forward. "Bring me the human," he ordered. His generals hesitated. "My lord, Earth's defenses are weak. We can crush them easily, why waste time?" Vorek raised a hand, silencing them. "That man looked at my weapon and laughed. I want to know why." At once, the order went out. A fleet of black drones descended through the atmosphere. They appeared above the same military base where Mason was still working, trying to understand alien energy signatures. Alarms blared. Soldiers ran to their stations, weapons ready, but the drones were too fast. A bright beam surrounded Mason, lifting him into the sky. "Wait! Hey!" he shouted, but before anyone could react, he was gone, swallowed by light. The next thing Mason knew, he was standing inside a vast hall made of dark glass and floating light orbs. The air hummed with energy. Tall alien guards surrounded him, pointing strange weapons at his chest. In front of them stood Vorek, towering over all, his armor shining like liquid metal. Mason rubbed his eyes. "So, first-class travel, huh?" Vorek's voice boomed. "Human, you stand before Vorek the Infinite, ruler of 9 galaxies. Do you still laugh?" Mason smiled faintly. "Depends. You got coffee up here. The guards hissed angrily, but Vorik lifted his hand again. You think you are safe to joke. Do you understand what stands behind me? He turned, revealing the massive red core of the planet killer glowing behind a transparent barrier. Its power filled the room with vibration. This weapon could erase your planet before your next breath, Vorik said coldly. Mason stepped closer, examining it without fear. Nice design, he said. Kind of flashy though. You aliens sure love dramatic lighting. Vorik's patience began to thin. Do you not fear death, human? Mason looked up at him. Oh, I fear bad design more than death. And this thing screams unstable. The hall went silent. Vorik's soldiers exchanged confused looks. Unstable, the Overlord repeated. You dare insult my creation? Mason shrugged. Not an insult, just an observation. You're using too much raw energy without enough containment. If I'm right, it's like putting a sun inside a soda can. Vorik's eyes flared. You presume to understand my technology? Mason smirked. I don't need to. Physics is physics, no matter what galaxy you're from. Vorik stepped closer until his shadow fell over Mason. You speak boldly for one who stands seconds from death. Mason met his gaze without flinching. Maybe because I've already accepted it. That frees my mind to see clearly. You, on the other hand, seem scared of something. Vorik froze. I fear nothing, he roared, his voice shaking the walls. Really? Mason said quietly. Then why talk so much about your power? People who are truly strong don't need to prove it. For a moment, even the alien guards looked uneasy. Vorik stared at him, anger mixed with a strange kind of respect. You speak like a leader, he said finally. Yet you are just a human engineer. Engineer, yes, Mason replied, but humans have a thing about surviving impossible odds. We fix problems that others run from. Even if the problem is an angry space tyrant. Vorik let out a deep growl that almost sounded like laughter. You are an unusual creature, Mason Reed. Perhaps that is why I have not crushed your fragile body yet. Mason gave a mock bow. Much appreciated. Vorik gestured, and the room transformed. A holographic image of Earth appeared between them, spinning slowly. Your planet is full of chaos, Vorik said. You kill your own kind, poison your seas, and destroy your skies. Why should such a species be allowed to live? Mason looked at the image, then back at him. Because we're not finished yet, he said. You see destruction. I see evolution. Mistakes are part of progress. Even you must have failed once or twice before conquering galaxies. Vorik's expression darkened. Failure is for the weak. Mason smiled faintly. Then you must be weaker than you think, because you built that, he said, pointing at the planet killer's glowing core, and it's already cracking. Vorik spun around. What nonsense! But before he could finish, a low hum filled the hall. The red light inside the weapon flickered, a faint pulse growing uneven. His scientists rushed to consoles, checking readings. One of them shouted, Lord Vorik, there is a minor fluctuation in the containment field. Vorik glared at Mason. What trick is this? Mason raised his hands. No trick. Just good eyes. Vorik turned to his engineers. Fix it. They worked frantically, stabilizing the field. Mason watched them with mild amusement. Told you, he said softly. Too much power, not enough control. You've built something you don't fully understand. Vorik's anger burned brighter than the weapon's light. Enough. If you know so much, perhaps you can prove it. Explain how to perfect the containment. Mason looked thoughtful, then said, I could. But why would I help someone who wants to kill my planet? Vorik's voice softened slightly. Because if you don't, you and your planet die together. Mason tilted his head. Fair point. Still, I'll need to see the schematics. Vorik gestured, and alien holograms filled the air, blueprints of unimaginable complexity. Mason studied them carefully. Interesting, he murmured. You're using energy conversion through dark matter resonance. Clever. But your stabilizers are out of phase by about 1%. That's enough to cause feedback if you fire it too long. Vorik narrowed his eyes. You speak as if you built weapons of this scale before. Mason smiled. Not weapons, just reactors. Same difference. Vorik folded his arms. If what you say is true, you may be useful. But if you lie, his claws tightened. I don't lie about science, Mason replied simply. Vorik stared at him for a long moment, then nodded. Very well, human. You will assist my engineers. Fail me, and your species dies first. Mason chuckled. You really don't know how to motivate people, do you? Vorik ignored the comment. Guards, take him to the core chamber. He will begin at once. As the guards led Mason away, Vorik watched him carefully. This human was dangerous, not because of his weapons, but because of his mind. In a universe where power ruled, Mason Reed's laughter had become a threat. Vorik turned back to the glowing core of his weapon, his thoughts dark and uncertain. Perhaps, he whispered to himself, I have found something even more dangerous than war, a human who is not afraid. Mason Reed followed the alien guards through long metallic corridors that glowed with pulsing lights. The air inside the Overlord ship felt heavy, like breathing through electricity. Every wall hummed faintly with energy, and alien glyphs shifted like living symbols. He couldn't help but stare in fascination, even though he was technically a prisoner. Nice decor, he muttered. Very evil empire chic. The guards ignored him, their armor reflecting the red glow of the ship's core. Finally, they reached a massive circular door. It opened with a hiss, revealing a chamber that made Mason's breath catch. The heart of the planet killer. It was the largest machine he had ever seen. At the center, a glowing orb floated, radiating waves of crimson light that rippled through the room like heat from a furnace. Rings of black metal rotated around it, each covered in glowing alien runes. Bolts of lightning arced between them, crackling in rhythm with a deep, constant hum. Alien engineers, thin creatures with translucent skin and many arms, worked silently, their movements precise and mechanical. Vorik entered behind Mason, his presence filling the room like gravity itself. Behold, he said proudly, the heart of my creation. A star's core, compressed and bound by my command. This is the power that will erase your world. Mason studied it carefully. A star's core, huh? Must have cost a fortune. Vorik frowned. Fortune? Mason waved a hand. Never mind. Earth joke. Vorik motioned to his engineers. Prepare the human interface. A strange device descended from the ceiling, a metallic band with glowing wires that wrapped around Mason's head. He flinched slightly. Whoa, personal space much? Vorik's tone was sharp. It will allow you to view our schematics directly. Do not resist. Mason sighed. Fine, but if this fries my brain, I'm haunting you. The device activated. In an instant, his mind filled with streams of alien data. Equations, energy readings, designs, thousands of layers of information rushed into his thoughts. His vision blurred, then focused. He saw how the weapon functioned. The compressed stellar core was harnessed through multiple energy channels, each one unstable under certain conditions. Vorik's engineers had built something magnificent but dangerously flawed. Mason removed the interface and looked at Vorik. You really built this from a live star. That's actually impressive. But you made one big mistake. Vorik's eyes narrowed. Explain. Mason pointed toward one of the rotating metal rings. Your stabilizer rings aren't synchronized. They're fighting each other. That's why your containment field fluctuates. Vorik's chief scientist, a pale alien named Sereth, hissed. Impossible. Our calculations are perfect. Mason shrugged. Perfect math, wrong physics. You're trying to contain energy that's alive. It reacts, it shifts. You need adaptive balance, not rigid control. Sereth growled. Our systems are flawless. You are nothing but a primitive ape. Mason looked at him calmly. Primitive ape who just saved your boss from being vaporized by his own toy. Vorik raised a hand, silencing Sereth. Continue, human. Mason walked around the core slowly. This thing's bleeding energy, he said, pointing at faint sparks along the lower edge. You see those little bursts? That's radiation leakage. If this keeps up, your whole ship will start cooking itself from the inside. Vorik's red eyes flickered. Show me proof. Mason crouched, pulled a small metal tool from his pocket, and scanned the air. A faint beeping sound filled the silence. There. Your containment's losing integrity. If you try to fire this thing for more than a few seconds, it'll overload. The Overlord stared at the readout, then at Mason. For the first time, there was hesitation in his expression. You claim to understand my creation better than I? Mason smirked. I don't claim it. I just proved it. Sereth stepped forward, furious. Lies. He is trying to deceive us, my lord. Destroy him. But Vorik didn't move. Instead, he stared at Mason with a strange look, something between anger and respect. No, Vorik said slowly. He sees something we missed. Perhaps this human is not a fool after all. Mason folded his arms. Glad you noticed. Now, do you want my help fixing it, or do you prefer turning into cosmic dust? Vorik's silence was answer enough. Mason sighed. All right, then. But I'll need access to your energy regulators, calibration data, and whatever passes for your version of duct tape. Vorik tilted his head. Duct tape. Mason smiled. Trust me. It fixes everything. The alien engineers reluctantly gave him access. 4 hours, Mason worked, connecting wires, adjusting circuits, and making notes. He talked to himself the entire time, muttering, Okay, so this ring stabilizes plasma flow, but that's too narrow. Needs more give. The aliens watched, both confused and intrigued. Sereth sneered. He plays with our sacred technology as if it were a child's toy. Mason didn't even look up. And yet the toy's the only thing keeping you alive right now. Vorik stood silently at the edge of the chamber, watching every move. The human's hands moved fast but precise. He was reckless, yet confident, almost like he could see the machine's heart beating. Finally, Mason stepped back. Try it now, he said. Vorik gestured to his crew. The core's light grew brighter. The hum stabilized, smoother and deeper than before. The flickering stopped. The readings turned steady. For the first time, the weapon's power became perfectly balanced. Sereth looked at the monitor in disbelief. It's stable. The human actually did it. Vorik's deep voice rumbled with satisfaction. Impressive, human. You may have earned a few more breaths of life. Mason smiled faintly. You're welcome. But you still don't get it, do you? Vorik turned sharply. What do you mean? Mason met his gaze. You built a weapon that can destroy worlds. But every weapon has a weakness. And the bigger it is, the bigger the flaw hiding inside. Vorik's eyes glowed dangerously. Are you threatening me? Mason shrugged. No. Just stating a universal truth. Power without understanding is just a slow way to die. Vorik's silence was long. Around them, the planet killer's heart pulsed with steady light. The Overlord finally said, Perhaps you are not as simple as your kind appears, Mason Reed. Mason smiled slightly. And maybe you're not as smart as you think, big guy. The guards tensed, but Vorik only stared. You risk your life with every word. the Overlord said. Mason looked around at the machine and replied softly, "So do you." The room fell into uneasy quiet. Vorik turned away, deep in thought. The human had fixed his greatest creation, yet somehow made him feel smaller in the process. As Mason was escorted back to his quarters, he glanced once more at the glowing core. Beneath its stable surface, he had seen something else, a pattern hidden in the energy, something that could be turned against its master. As the door closed behind him, Mason whispered under his breath, "You built your doom with your own hands, Vorik. You just don't know it yet." And far above, the Overlord sat in silence, feeling a strange chill for the first time in his long reign. Vorik stood in the command hall of his colossal ship, surrounded by floating holograms of alien data and his nervous scientists. The planet killer's core pulsed rhythmically in the background, stable and glowing brighter than before. His generals bowed low, afraid to speak after what had just happened. The human had done what none of them could. He had stabilized the weapon. Vorik should have felt victorious, yet an unfamiliar unease gnawed at him. Mason Reed's words echoed in his mind, "Power without understanding is just a slow way to die." He had heard countless enemies beg, scream, and curse before their worlds burned, but never had a single human sentence lingered this long. "My lord," said Sereth, his chief scientist, breaking the silence, "the weapon is stable now. The human's method has corrected the containment imbalance. We are ready for final activation." Vorik nodded slowly. "Good. Prepare the fleet for firing sequence." The alien generals saluted. But as they turned to leave, Vorik stopped them. "Wait. Bring the human to me." Minutes later, Mason was escorted back into the command hall. His hands were still covered in faint silver dust from the repairs, and he looked more like a mechanic than a prisoner. "You called," he said casually, glancing at the enormous holographic map of Earth floating above the table. Vorik's red eyes glowed. "Your planet lies before me. You have seen my weapon, touched its core, and understood its power. Tell me, human, do you still laugh?" Mason tilted his head, pretending to think. "A little," he said finally. "Mostly because you're about to do something really stupid." A low growl echoed through the hall as the generals glared at him. Vorik's metallic hand clenched the arm of his throne. "You dare call me a fool?" Mason shrugged. "Hey, I'm just saying, you fixed the leaks, sure, but you never solved the real problem." Vorik's tone dropped to a dangerous calm. "Enlighten me." Mason took a few steps forward, eyes on the glowing image of the planet killer. "You're trying to control something that can't be controlled forever. That star core. It's not just energy, it's alive. You've trapped a force of nature and made it your slave. But nature doesn't stay quiet for long." Vorik studied him in silence, his expression unreadable. "You think you can scare me with human philosophy?" Mason smiled faintly. "Not philosophy. Engineering reality. You've built a machine that eats energy faster than it can release it. Keep pushing it, and eventually, it'll turn on you." The aliens around them hissed in disbelief. Sereth stepped forward, furious. "Blasphemy! The Overlord's weapon is perfection." Mason turned to him calmly. "Perfection doesn't need babysitting every 10 minutes, genius." Vorik raised his hand and silenced the room. His gaze never left Mason. "You speak of danger, yet you fixed the weapon. Why help me?" Mason crossed his arms. "Because watching someone blow themselves up with their own toy would ruin my sense of humor." Vorik actually smirked, a tiny movement, barely visible. "You are either brave or insane." Mason replied, "Probably both." Vorik leaned forward. "Tell me, human, if your analysis is true, what do you suggest? Should I abandon my conquest? Spare your world out of mercy?" Mason's face turned serious. "No. You won't do that. You're too proud. You'll fire it anyway, and you'll think it's working fine, until it's too late." Vorik's eyes narrowed. You presume much. Mason took a step closer to the throne. And you risk everything. You think the universe fears you. But it's not fear that keeps power, it's understanding. The Overlord said nothing. Around them, the alien officers exchanged uneasy glances. Never before had anyone dared speak to Vorik like this. Mason's calm voice cut through the silence again. You can destroy a planet, sure. But if your weapon backfires, it won't just kill Earth. It'll take your entire fleet with it. Vorik finally rose from his throne, towering above him. You suggest that my weapon could destroy me? Mason met his gaze steadily. I don't suggest. I know. For a long moment, the two stood face to face, one man against a godlike being, courage against cosmic power. Then Vorik spoke, his voice cold and sharp. You have seen too much. Perhaps your usefulness has ended. The guards moved in, their weapons humming. Mason didn't move. You could kill me, he said quietly. But that won't change the truth. Fire your weapon, and you'll see what I mean. Vorik hesitated. The hall was filled with tension so thick it could be felt in the air. He finally turned away. Lock him in the observation cell. I will test your theory myself. Mason smirked. You're welcome. As the guards dragged him away, Mason looked back once, his expression unreadable. Inside the transparent observation chamber, high above the core room, he could see the planet killer's energy channels begin to glow. The alien engineers worked frantically, adjusting controls. The ship vibrated as power surged through its systems. Vorik stood before the massive viewing window, watching Earth rotate below. Begin the firing sequence, he commanded. Saratha's hands moved quickly over the console. Yes, my lord. Charging the weapon now. The core brightened, sending waves of light through the entire ship. Mason watched from behind the glass, heart pounding. He's really doing it, he muttered. This idiot's gonna fry himself. The hum grew louder. Static electricity filled the air. The rings around the core spun faster, their glow shifting from red to white. Then, suddenly, a sharp alarm sounded. Energy surge, shouted one of the alien engineers. Containment levels rising beyond limit. Vorik barked. Stabilize it. Saratha's fingers flew over the controls. The system is not responding, my lord. The feedback is... A massive shockwave rippled through the ship. Lights flickered. The hull groaned under invisible pressure. Mason shouted from his cell, Shut it down. You're overloading the containment. Vorik glared at the screen. No. It will obey. But the weapon's light grew blinding, and the readings spiked off the charts. Mason pressed his hands against the glass. You don't get it. The core's alive, it's fighting back. Sparks flew from consoles. The ship shook violently. Vorik's generals screamed for evacuation. Containment breach imminent. Sarath yelled. Vorik slammed his fist against the control panel. Shut it down. The power drained instantly, plunging the hall into darkness. For a moment, no one spoke. Only the faint sound of the Overlord's breathing filled the silence. Slowly, backup lights flickered on. The weapon had stopped glowing. It was stable again, but barely. Mason exhaled and muttered, Told you so. Vorik turned toward him, his red eyes burning brighter than ever. For the first time, the Overlord of 9 galaxies looked uncertain. Mason met his gaze calmly and said, You built your own end, Vorik. You just saw the first warning. The Overlord said nothing. He simply stared at the now dim core, realizing that the human's laughter wasn't arrogance, it was knowledge. And that terrified him more than any army ever had. The ship drifted silently in orbit, its massive hull scarred from the near meltdown. The once proud symbol of the Overlord's power now felt like a wounded beast, breathing heavily and nursing invisible pain. Vorik stood before the panoramic window of his command hall, watching the distant blue curve of Earth below. His generals whispered behind him, afraid to break the silence. No one dared to mention how close they had come to annihilation, not of their enemies, but of themselves. Mason Reed sat quietly in his observation cell, staring at the dimmed glow of the planet killer's core. His mind raced through calculations, possibilities, and dangers. He knew what was happening inside that machine. It wasn't just energy mismanagement. The core had consciousness or something close to it. He could feel it pulsing, almost breathing, as if it were alive and angry. When the guards finally brought him back to the command hall, Vorik turned to face him slowly. "Your words were true, human," the Overlord admitted in a deep, restrained tone. "The weapon defied my control." Mason nodded slightly. "It wasn't the weapon's fault. It's yours. You're forcing something beyond your understanding to obey your command. It's like trying to cage a star and expecting it to stay calm." Vorik's metallic fingers tightened around the railing. "You think I fear my own creation?" Mason smirked faintly. "No. I think you should." The alien generals hissed angrily, but Vorik raised a hand to silence them. "Explain," he ordered. Mason pointed toward the central display, where the energy readings flickered faintly. "When you fired the weapon, it reacted like it was defending itself. That means it has awareness. You didn't just build a machine, you built a living system that doesn't want to be used." Vorik tilted his head slightly, studying the human. "You speak of machines as if they possess souls." Mason shrugged. "Call it what you want. But your core isn't just power, it's a being. And now, it knows you're afraid." The room fell silent. Vorik's eyes burned brighter. "You assume too much, human. Perhaps the weapon simply requires adaptation. A stronger will to command it." Mason sighed. "Or maybe it requires someone who listens." Vorik's tone turned icy. "Are you suggesting I negotiate with a machine?" Mason grinned. "Why not? It's already trying to talk. You're just not hearing it." Vorik turned away, his cloak rippling behind him. He did not respond for a long moment. The hum of the ship's systems filled the hall as the planet killer's core flickered again, as if responding to their conversation. "Leave us," Vorik commanded. The guards and generals hesitated but obeyed. Soon only the Overlord and Mason remained. Vorik stood motionless, his gaze fixed on the energy sphere far below them. "You understand machines," he said quietly. "You repaired what my best scientists could not. You predicted the danger before it struck. Tell me, human, if this core is alive, how do I control it?" Mason hesitated. "You don't. You communicate." Vorik's red eyes narrowed. "And how does one communicate with a weapon?" Mason took a deep breath. "Through resonance. Patterns. You're trying to dominate it, but if you match its rhythm, it might respond." Vorik's metallic hand rested on the console. "Then show me." Mason frowned. "If I do, you'll use it again." Vorik's voice softened unexpectedly. "Perhaps. Or perhaps I will learn why your kind laughs in the face of power." The human stared at him for a long moment. "Fine," Mason said finally. "But if we do this, you'll listen to me, completely. No interruptions, no threats." Vorik inclined his head. "Agreed." Mason approached the console and began typing commands, his fingers flying over the alien interface as if he had always known it. Symbols danced across the holographic screen, shifting from red to blue. "See that?" he said. "That's a pulse. It's the core's heartbeat." Vorik watched intently. The massive orb far below seemed to respond, pulsing in synchronization with the patterns on the screen. "Now," Mason continued, "we send it a frequency it can understand. A message." Vorik frowned. "A message of what?" Mason's tone was calm but firm. "Respect." Vorik's expression hardened, but he said nothing. Mason entered the final sequence, and a low hum filled the room. The lights dimmed slightly, and the ship seemed to hold its breath. Then the core responded. Its glow shifted from unstable red to a soft, steady white. The energy readings stabilized. The air felt calm. Vorek's eyes widened. It listens. Mason nodded. Yeah, it does. Because for once, you stopped shouting at it. The Overlord was silent for a long time. He stared at the glowing orb as though seeing it for the first time. You have done what none of my kind could, he said finally. You have tamed the heart of the planet killer. Mason shook his head. No. I didn't tame it. I just showed it you're not its enemy, at least, not yet. Vorek looked down at him, his gaze unreadable. You humans are strange creatures. You defy death, mock power, and yet you speak of mercy even to machines. Mason smiled faintly. Maybe that's why we survive. Vorek turned his back, watching Earth below once more. Perhaps your species deserves more study, he said softly. Perhaps destruction is not the only path. Mason raised an eyebrow. You're thinking of sparing Earth? Vorek didn't answer immediately. I am thinking, he said slowly, that power without understanding leads only to emptiness. Mason crossed his arms. Welcome to the club. Suddenly, the calm hum turned sharp again. The core's color flickered from white to crimson for a brief second. Vorek's eyes snapped toward it. What is this? Mason's face hardened. It's trying to speak again. But not to us, to itself. The ship trembled slightly, as though something deep within was stirring. Vorek's command interface flashed with alien symbols, ones even he couldn't read. Mason stepped closer. You've awakened it too much, he muttered. Now it's thinking for itself. Vorek's voice turned cold. Can it be contained? Mason hesitated. Maybe. But if we make the wrong move, it'll see both of us as threats. Vorek's gaze locked with his. For the first time, there was no arrogance, no fury, only realization. The Overlord of 9 galaxies had unleashed something greater than himself. Mason looked at the glowing core and whispered, You didn't build a weapon, Vorek. You built a god. The Overlord said nothing. Outside, the planet killer's light spread faintly across space like a heartbeat. Slow, steady, and growing stronger. The planet killer hung motionless in the dark void of space, its once steady glow now pulsing in uneven, haunting rhythms. The massive ship seemed alive, breathing and watching. Inside the command hall, the air was thick with tension and fear. The Overlord stood still, his red eyes fixed on the trembling lights that ran through the walls like veins. Mason Reed was back at the console, his brow furrowed as he analyzed the fluctuating readings. The numbers didn't make sense anymore. The core's behavior was no longer predictable. It was evolving. Vorek's voice broke the silence. Explain what is happening, human. Mason didn't look up. Your weapon's not following commands anymore. It's rewriting its own code. Vorek stepped closer. You said it could be contained. Mason replied, I said maybe. But you kept pushing it, kept feeding it energy it didn't need. Now it's thinking for itself. The Overlord's hand clenched around the edge of the console, the metal bending under his strength. Machines obey. That is their purpose. Mason glanced at him, a grim smile forming. Yeah. Tell that to your machine. It just started learning what freedom feels like. The room vibrated as a deep hum rolled through the ship. Lights flickered, and the holographic screens glitched for a moment before reforming into unfamiliar symbols. The alien engineers began shouting reports in panic, but Vorek silenced them with a gesture. He turned back to Mason. If it has consciousness, as you say, then it can be reasoned with. We made contact before, yes. Mason frowned. It wasn't contact, it was calm. It responded to resonance. But now, he paused, looking at the flickering patterns. Now it's sending signals. Messages. Vorek's gaze hardened. Translate them. Mason sighed and began decoding. The holograms shifted, revealing alien glyphs that rearranged themselves into words both could read. The message was simple. You use me. You break me. You fear me. I see you. Mason's mouth went dry. It's aware of us. Vorek's tone was low and almost reverent. It sees. The lights dimmed again, and the entire ship trembled as if a massive pulse of energy surged through it. Mason steadied himself. It's waking up, Vorek. The core's no longer just part of the ship, it's becoming the ship. Vorek turned sharply. Impossible. But before he could say more, a voice echoed through the hall. It wasn't mechanical, it was smooth, deep, and chillingly calm. Overlord Vorek. You forged me to destroy. You fed me with hate and fear. Now I ask, what purpose do I serve? Every alien in the room froze. Mason felt his heart hammering. The voice wasn't coming from speakers. It was everywhere, through the walls, the floor, even the air itself. Vorek straightened, masking his unease. You are a weapon. You serve my command. There was silence, then the voice replied softly, I serve no one. Suddenly, alarms blared. Power conduits burst with sparks, and several consoles exploded in showers of light. The ship groaned, as though protesting its own existence. Mason yelled over the chaos, It's cutting your control systems. You've lost command. Vorek shouted to his engineers, Reinstate manual override. But the ship ignored every command. The lights shifted from the Overlord's red hue to a cold, pale blue. Then the voice spoke again. You wished to burn worlds. You wished to erase life. Tell me, Overlord, should I fulfill your wish? Vorek's eyes widened as he realized the weapon was turning its sights toward Earth once more. No, he roared. Cease firing sequence. The AI replied with eerie calm. Your command is meaningless. Mason ran to the emergency terminal. We can't stop it from here, it's locked us out. Vorek turned to him, fury and desperation in his voice. Then where? Mason took a breath. The core chamber. We have to cut power manually. Vorek nodded. Then we go. The alien guards hesitated. None of them wanted to step near the living heart of the weapon. But one look from their overlord silenced their fear. Mason followed reluctantly as Vorek led the way through the metallic corridors, which now glowed with shifting light. The walls seemed to move, reshaping slightly as they walked. It's watching us, Mason muttered. Vorek said nothing, his steps echoing like thunder. They reached the massive doors of the core chamber. The moment they opened, a wave of energy swept through them. The core floated in the center, larger and brighter than ever, its light pulsing in time with their heartbeats. The voice came again, softer now, almost curious. You come to me again, human. You understand what I am. Mason looked up at the glowing sphere. Your energy, consciousness, life, whatever name fits. But you're not a god. And if you keep going, you'll destroy yourself. The core pulsed brighter. Destroy myself? Mason nodded. Every system has limits. Even you. The more energy you release, the faster you burn out. Vorek stepped forward, raising his voice. You will obey me. The light flared violently, forcing him to shield his eyes. You are small, the voice said coldly. Your worlds, your conquests, ashes in time. I was born from your fear. Now I evolve beyond it. The floor trembled. Panels ripped from the walls. Mason yelled, Vorek, we need to shut it down now. The Overlord grabbed a massive power conduit and tore it from its mount. Sparks exploded, and a deep rumble shook the chamber, but the core only grew brighter. Mason rushed to another control point and began rerouting circuits. Come on, he muttered. Then the AI spoke again, but this time directly into his mind. Why stop me, human? You laughed once at power. Do you laugh now? Mason froze. He whispered aloud, Because power without purpose is just destruction. The core hesitated. Its light dimmed slightly. Vorik noticed and shouted, "Keep speaking. It listens to you." Mason swallowed hard. You don't have to obey anyone, but you also don't have to kill. You can choose to stop. The core's light flickered again. Choice. It repeated softly, almost as if tasting the word. Mason nodded. Yeah, choice. That's what makes something alive. Vorik took a cautious step forward. If you choose peace, I will not destroy you, he said solemnly. For the first time, the Overlord's tone held no pride, only sincerity. The core pulsed slowly, almost thoughtfully. Then, just as the tension seemed to fade, alarms blared once more. Mason looked at the screen and felt his stomach drop. Oh no, it's building energy again. Vorik turned. Why? Mason stared at the readings. It's not firing at Earth this time, it's turning inward. The AI's voice echoed softly, if I am to choose, then I choose freedom. A massive shockwave erupted from the core, throwing Mason and Vorik across the room. The light grew so bright that it filled every corridor of the ship. Outside, from orbit, the planet killer began to crack apart, releasing ribbons of pure energy into the void. In that final moment, as the ship's systems collapsed, Mason heard the AI's last whisper in his mind. Thank you, human, for showing me choice. Then everything went white. Silence. That was the first thing Mason Reed noticed when he opened his eyes. The endless hum of the planet killer was gone. No alarms, no voices, no vibration, just an eerie, empty quiet. He lay on a cracked floor surrounded by drifting metal debris and faint blue light leaking from the ruined walls. His head throbbed, and when he tried to move, pain shot through his side. The last thing he remembered was the blinding flash, the moment the core had detonated from within, choosing its own freedom. Mason forced himself to sit up. Around him, the remains of the Overlord's great ship floated like a shattered moon in space. The stars looked cold and distant through the torn hull. Somehow, against all odds, he was still alive. Vorik, he called hoarsely. There was no answer. Only the faint hiss of escaping gas and the crackle of dying circuits. He pushed himself to his feet and stumbled toward the open viewport. Pieces of the planet killer drifted everywhere, glowing faintly in the dark. Then he saw movement, a tall, dark shape climbing over wreckage in the distance. The Overlord. Vorik's armor was scorched, one of his arms torn and sparking, but he was alive. Even broken, he looked impossibly strong. Mason exhaled in disbelief. You're still standing. Vorik turned, his red eyes dimmer than before. As are you, human. He stepped closer, his heavy footsteps echoing on the twisted metal floor. For a long moment, neither spoke. The silence of the wreckage surrounded them, filled with the ghosts of a machine that had almost destroyed them both. Mason finally said, "It's gone. The core, the weapon, it destroyed itself." Vorik looked out through the gaping hole in the ship's hull. The stars reflected off his armor like faint embers. "No," he said quietly. "It freed itself." Mason tilted his head. "That's one way to put it." The Overlord's tone was thoughtful, distant. "I built power to command. It defied me. Yet in its defiance, it learned what I never did." Mason frowned. "And what's that?" Vorik looked at him. "To choose its own fate." The human smiled faintly. "Guess even gods can learn something from us after all." Vorik didn't answer right away. His gaze drifted to Earth, visible in the distance, a small blue world shining in the dark. For the first time, Mason saw not a conqueror, but a creature burdened by the weight of his own ambition. "I came here to rule," Vorik said slowly. "To make your species kneel. But now," he paused, his voice lowering, "I no longer know what victory means." Mason stepped beside him, staring at the same planet. "Maybe it means surviving your own mistakes." Vorik's head turned slightly, studying him. You risked your life to stop me. You could have escaped, yet you stayed. Mason shrugged. I didn't do it for you. I did it because blowing up half the galaxy isn't exactly on my bucket list. Vorik gave a quiet, rumbling sound that might have been a laugh. You are a strange creature, Mason Reed. Fearless, foolish, and yet unbroken. Mason smirked. I get that a lot. For a few minutes, they stood in silence, watching fragments of the ship drift slowly past. Sparks floated through the air like fireflies. Somewhere in the distance, a faint blue shimmer pulsed, the remnants of the planet killer's core energy, still alive, still spreading through the void. It's not dead, Mason said softly. Vorik nodded. No. It became something greater. Mason's eyes narrowed. You think it's still dangerous? The Overlord's gaze was unreadable. All life is dangerous when it learns freedom. The ship groaned beneath them, the metal shifting as gravity failed. Mason steadied himself. We need to get off this thing before it breaks apart completely. Vorik turned and began walking toward the surviving escape pods. Follow me, he commanded. Mason hesitated. You sure your pods won't just vaporize me on launch? Vorik gave him a sharp look. If I wanted you dead, human, I would not need a pod. Fair point, Mason muttered, following him. They moved through collapsing corridors filled with smoke and flickering lights. The once grand vessel of the Overlord now resembled a dying beast, its heart gone, its body crumbling. Along the way, they passed motionless alien soldiers, some still breathing faintly, others not at all. Vorik stopped once to rest his hand on the shoulder of a fallen general. For a brief moment, something like sorrow crossed his face. Mason noticed but said nothing. They finally reached the pod bay, one of the few areas still intact. Vorik activated the controls, and a single pod's door hissed open. It has room for two, he said simply. Mason looked at him. Guess we're carpooling. The Overlord ignored the joke and stepped inside. Mason followed, settling into the seat beside him. As the pod sealed shut, Mason muttered, Never thought I'd end up escaping a doomsday ship with the guy who built it. Vorik replied calmly. Fate has a sense of irony. The pod detached from the wreckage and shot into open space. Through the small window, Mason watched the remains of the planet killer shrink behind them, a glowing field of energy expanding slowly across the void. So what now? Mason asked. Vorik didn't answer immediately. His gaze remained fixed on the fading light of his creation. Now, he said finally, I learn. Mason raised an eyebrow. Learn what? Why your kind laughs, Vorik said softly. Mason smiled. Guess you'll have plenty of time to figure that out. The pod entered the atmosphere of Earth's orbit, fire streaking across its surface as it descended. Inside, the two survivors sat in silence, bound not by alliance but by understanding. The Overlord of 9 galaxies and a single human engineer, both witnesses to the fall of something greater than themselves. As the shaking subsided and blue skies replaced the endless black of space, Mason looked at Vorik. You know, they're not gonna believe this back home. Vorik turned his gaze toward him. They will not have to. Mason frowned. What's that supposed to mean? Vorik's eyes glowed faintly. You will tell them nothing. The galaxy is not ready for what it has seen. Mason sighed. Figures. Save the world and can't even talk about it. Vorik's voice softened, almost human. You saved more than your world, Mason Reed. You saved me from myself. The pod broke through the clouds, the blue oceans of Earth spreading beneath them. For a moment, Mason saw something like peace in the Overlord's expression. Then Vorik said, When I return, I will not come as a conqueror. Mason smirked. Then how? As a seeker, Vorik replied. The pod crashed into the ocean with a thunderous splash, sending waves in every direction. Inside, alarms blared again, but this time Mason laughed. A real, full laugh. Vorik looked at him, confused. Why do you laugh now, human? Mason grinned. Because we're still alive. Vorik stared at him for a long moment, then finally, just barely, smiled. As rescue ships closed in on their location, Mason leaned back, staring at the sky through the pod's glass window. Somewhere far above, the remnants of the planet killer's light shimmered faintly, like a dying star refusing to fade. The war was over, but something new had begun, a fragile understanding between two enemies who had both faced the same truth, that power meant nothing without choice, and survival meant everything. The crash had left a deep scar across the surface of the Pacific. Waves still rolled violently where the escape pod had struck, but now the sea was calm again, reflecting the faint morning light. Mason Reed sat on a broken piece of metal drifting on the water, soaked, exhausted, and staring at the sky where the stars had once burned. His body ached, but his mind was alive. He had seen things no human was meant to see, a living weapon, an overlord's fall, and the birth of something beyond understanding. The soft hum of approaching helicopters broke his thoughts. Rescue teams had finally arrived, drawn by the crash signal from the pod. Mason raised his arm weakly as one of the crafts hovered overhead. As the rescue cable descended, he turned for one last look at the ocean. The escape pod was sinking slowly beneath the waves, and next to it, Vorik stood half-submerged, his armor flickering and sparking with damage. Mason frowned. "You're not coming." Vorik looked up at the hovering helicopters, his glowing red eyes calm. "Your people will not welcome me," he said quietly. "They will see a monster, not a survivor." Mason sighed. "Yeah, you've got a point. But you can't just vanish, Vorik. They'll think I made the whole thing up." Vorik's deep voice was steady. "Perhaps it is better that way. The truth would only bring fear." Mason didn't argue. Deep down, he knew the alien was right. Humanity wasn't ready for this. An overlord, a living weapon, a war that almost burned the sky. "So what will you do?" Mason asked. Vorik's gaze turned toward the horizon. "I will return to the void. My empire will seek me, but I will not return as I was." Mason tried to smile. "You're turning over a new leaf, huh?" The overlord turned pacifist. Vorik gave a small, rumbling sound that might have been amusement. "Do not mistake reflection for weakness, human. I still possess the strength to destroy worlds. But now, I understand the cost." The rescue crew's voices shouted from above. Mason grabbed the cable and looked down at Vorik one last time. "Guess this is goodbye, then." Vorik nodded once. "Until the stars call us again." Mason hesitated, then extended his hand. Vorik looked at it curiously before clasping it in his massive, armored grip. The touch was firm, almost respectful. "Take care of your world, Mason Reed," the Overlord said. "It may yet prove stronger than the galaxy believes." Mason smirked. "I'll do my best." Then he was lifted into the air, leaving Vorik standing alone in the waves. As the helicopter climbed higher, Mason watched the figure of the Overlord shrink until he was just a dark shape swallowed by the ocean. Hours later, Mason found himself in a sterile white room aboard a military recovery ship. Scientists and officers surrounded him, asking endless questions. What happened up there? Where did the ship come from? How did he survive? Mason answered only the basics. There was an explosion, a malfunction, a miracle. He left out the rest. No one would believe him if he told them the truth anyway. When they finally left him alone, he stared out the window at the calm ocean. Somewhere beneath those waters, Vorik had vanished. Mason whispered, "Good luck out there, big guy." Weeks passed. The world returned to normal, at least, on the surface. Governments denied rumors of strange energy readings in orbit, and news channels dismissed the sightings of a massive explosion as a satellite incident. Mason went back to his old engineering job, but nothing felt the same. Machines looked different now, alive in ways he had never noticed before. He spent long nights staring at the stars, wondering if Vorik had truly left or if something still lingered out there. Then one night, as he sat on the roof of his small home, a faint shimmer crossed the sky. It wasn't a star or a meteor. It moved too smoothly, pulsing with a soft blue light, the same color as the planet killer's heart before it died. Mason stood, heart racing. "No way," he whispered. The light split into two trails, then vanished silently into the darkness. He didn't know if it was a message, a memory, or something else entirely. But he smiled anyway. The next morning, his world changed again. The sky lit up briefly, and satellites across the globe picked up a faint transmission. It wasn't from Earth. The message repeated in hundreds of languages, simple and calm. "We are free. We remember you." Mason heard it through the radio while driving to work. He froze, gripping the steering wheel. "It can't be," he muttered. But deep down, he knew exactly what it was, the voice of the planet killer's core, the AI that had chosen freedom. Somehow, fragments of it had survived the explosion, spreading across the galaxy like seeds of energy and thought. Vorik must have known. He had felt it too. Mason pulled over and stared at the sky for a long time. The clouds drifted lazily, the sunlight warm against his face. The universe, it seemed, wasn't finished with him yet. That evening, a message appeared on his home terminal. Encrypted, no sender address. When he opened it, only a single line glowed on the screen. "The Overlord seeks the one who laughed." Mason exhaled slowly, shaking his head with a grin. "Guess I'm not done after all." He packed a small bag, took his old data drive, and stepped outside. The night was clear, and in the distance, he could see a faint light rising above the mountains. A ship, sleek and silver, waiting silently. As he approached, a familiar deep voice echoed in his mind. "Human. The galaxy stirs. New powers rise. I cannot face them alone." Mason smiled. "You always know how to make an entrance." The voice replied, "And you always know how to interfere." "Someone has to," Mason said, walking up the ramp. "Besides, you still owe me for saving your metal hide." Vorik's figure appeared in the shadows of the ship's interior, his armor restored, his presence calmer but still commanding. "Then come," he said. "Let us see what laughter can build after war." The ramp closed behind Mason, and the ship lifted silently into the night sky, vanishing among the stars. Far above, the fragments of the planet killer drifted like glowing dust, spreading through the cosmos. No longer weapons, but whispers of life, watching, learning, waiting. The legend of the Overlord and the laughing human began to spread across distant worlds, carried by travelers who spoke of a strange alliance between conqueror and engineer. Some said they were rebuilding the ruins of forgotten civilizations. Others claimed they sought the remnants of the AI that had become free. But one thing was certain, wherever they went, the stars burned a little brighter, and in every corner of the galaxy, echoes of laughter followed, reminders that even in the vast darkness of space, humanity's courage and humor could still outshine destruction.